My dad's words echoed, "You've always been independent. Handle it." He said that after I called him from the ICU, 3 years later, when he sought control, my response was simple: help yourself. I'm a 30-year-old man, and my story begins with a drunk driver, a rain-slicked highway, and the sickening crunch of my spine against a seatbelt. It was 3 weeks before Christmas, and I was driving home from work. Heavy rain had blurred the roads all evening, turning every surface into a confusing glare. I was barely 10 minutes from my apartment when a pickup truck blew through a red light and slammed into the driver's side of my car. I never saw it coming. All I remember is the metal collapsing, the airbags exploding, and then total darkness. 3 days later, I woke up in the ICU. A tube was in my throat, a neck brace held me, rigid, and pain seared through my entire body. Doctors told me I had a fractured back, a shattered femur, 3 broken ribs, and internal bleeding that almost killed me. The impact had severely twisted my body, and they weren't even sure if I'd ever walk normally again. The nurse said I'd need at least 8 months of physical therapy, maybe more. That alone was devastating. But what truly broke me was the silence. When I opened my eyes, no one was there. No flowers, no texts, no family crowding my doorway, just beeping monitors and the distant sounds of nurses. I asked if anyone had visited. The nurse replied, "No, not yet." My dad and older sister didn't show up until the 3rd day. They stood awkwardly by the window, avoiding my gaze. My mom brought a bag of grapes, as if it were just a casual afternoon call. My father joked that I'd finally gotten a break from working too much. My sister just scrolled on her phone the whole time. They stayed for 15 minutes, then left. I didn't hear from them again. My girlfriend, or rather, my ex, visited once. She stood by the bed, her eyes wide with fear, barely able to meet my gaze. 2 days later, I got a text from her. "I can't do this. I'm sorry. I didn't sign up for this kind of future." That was it. For years together, erased in 8 words. While I was still recovering in the hospital, the bills started piling up. My job put me on temporary disability, slashing my income to a fraction of what it was. My car was totaled. I was still paying rent for an apartment I couldn't even access. My savings vanished in less than 2 weeks, eaten up by the ambulance ride, emergency surgery, and hospital stay. I called my dad asking for help. Just a few $100 to cover groceries and part of January's rent. He grumbled, then said, "You've always been independent. Handle it." He hung up. My sister didn't even answer her phone. By mid-January, I received an eviction notice. Couldn't work, couldn't move properly, and couldn't pay. My landlord gave me until the end of the month to leave. Desperate, I called my family again, asking if I could stay in their guest room. No one asked where I was staying or if I could even walk. My mom claimed it wasn't a good time because my sister had the flu, and they didn't want me bringing hospital germs into the house. For 5 nights, I slept in my rental car, parked in the lot behind my old gym. I turned off the engine to save gas, reclined the seat, and wrapped myself in hospital blankets. The brace on my leg made getting comfortable almost impossible. I barely slept, barely ate. I counted change just to buy drive-through fries. I had to crawl to public restrooms using my arms because I couldn't put weight on my leg without crutches, which I couldn't easily carry without a bag, and I didn't have one. One night, a coworker I barely knew saw me parked outside the office lot. He found out what was happening and invited me to stay with him and his wife. They offered me their pull-out couch, cooked for me, and drove me to my doctor's appointments. Complete strangers treated me better than my own family. A few days later, I saw Christmas photos online. My entire family smiling around a dinner table with candles, wine, and matching pajamas. I wasn't just forgotten. I was deliberately excluded. On New Year's Day, my sister called. She said they hadn't helped me because they didn't want to enable me, and that I needed to learn how to ask for help the right way. I asked if they even cared that I couldn't walk without assistance, couldn't bathe properly, or cover my medical copays. She told me I was being dramatic. I left voicemails. I cried to them. I told them I didn't know what to do. I told them I was scared. I got one reply, a text from my father. "Get it together, man." When I made one last attempt, I called my mother from the couch I was borrowing and explained I needed help until I could stand on my own. She told me to stop guilt-tripping everyone, then blocked my number. In that moment, something inside me just shut down. I don't remember much from the next 2 weeks, just panic attacks and numb days. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, unable to even cry anymore. If I'd had access to anything more dangerous than crutches, I probably wouldn't be here now. Then, one afternoon, an email arrived from my old college professor. He'd heard about the accident through a mutual friend and offered me the room above his garage. Said it wasn't much, but I could stay until I got back on my feet. I accepted without a second thought. The next morning, he picked me up and helped. Me with my few belongings, just a duffel bag and my leg brace. That night, looking at my still yellow bruises in the mirror, I made a silent promise. I would never ask for help again, and I would never give my family another chance to abandon me. They'd had their shot. The physical therapy center was tucked away between a laundromat and a dentist's office, the kind of place you'd easily miss. I went twice a week. Sessions started with stretching, then balance exercises, then walking with parallel bars. The first time I stood without help, my left leg trembled like paper. By the end of the second week, I was crossing the room on crutches. The pain often blurred my vision, but I showed up every single time. No excuses, no missed sessions. That small room above the garage, I opened my laptop every morning like it was my lifeline. I taught myself new software, updated my old portfolios, started taking on freelance gigs. Graphic design, copywriting, branding for small businesses. The room had no kitchen, so I got used to heating canned soup and working through dinner. Some nights, I stayed up until 3 a.m., chasing invoices or refining drafts. The money came in slowly at first, but within 3 months I could pay for my own therapy, fill my prescriptions on time, and keep my phone plan active. It felt like finally breathing fresh air after being underwater. 2 college friends reached out unexpectedly. One sent an Uber Eats gift card and asked for my Venmo. The other mailed a package with snacks, socks, and a handwritten letter. We hadn't spoken in years, but they'd heard what happened and wanted to help. There was no guilt, no lectures, just genuine support. The professor I was staying with started checking in every evening, knocking once before coming in with tea or takeout, asking about my leg and offering small pieces of advice. A local therapist agreed to work with me on a sliding scale. He taught me how to set up a proper invoicing system, how to negotiate rates, and how to say no without apologizing. He advised me to approach my recovery like a business plan, track every win, analyze every loss, and never let those who abandoned me have a seat at the table again. Each week, I left his office a little straighter, a little less angry. The therapist's office smelled of citrus and old books. For the first time in my life, I told her how my family had always seen independence as a threat and emotional needs as a weakness. She didn't interrupt or try to fix me. She just listened. From January to May, my phone remained silent. No texts, no emails, no calls from my parents or sister. No one asked about my recovery. No one asked if I could walk yet. I blocked their numbers and never looked back. By month 5, I'd progressed from using a cane to walking without assistance. My steps were slow and uneven, but I made it from the garage to the mailbox without stopping. That same week, I signed a lease for a tiny studio apartment 15 minutes away. It had peeling paint and only one working window AC unit, but it was mine, and every cent of rent came from my own hard work. A week after moving in, I landed my first major client, a 6-month contract with a firm looking to rebrand. It was stable money with potential for growth, so I bought a decent workstation, filled my fridge with real food, and even set up autopay for my phone bill. No more scrambling or begging. After paying off one of my hospital debts, the professor drove me to the courthouse and took a photo of me standing at the top of the stairs, still with my crutches. He printed it, framed it, and gave it to me before I moved out, telling me it was proof I could climb back from anything. Then one day out of the blue, my mother's sister sent me a single-line message. "Your dad says you're doing better? For you, no invitation to reconnect." I left the message unread. By summer, I looked nothing like the man who'd been sleeping in his car 5 months prior. I shaved my beard, got a haircut, and started strength training with a personal trainer. My therapist recommended I wore well-fitting clothes now. I spoke more confidently, stood taller, and people at coffee shops mistook me for someone with options, a misconception I didn't correct. Then my sister texted me, "Heard you're doing okay? We knew you'd bounce back eventually." No apology. No accountability. No mention of the months they ignored my voicemails. Left me sleeping in a rental car, or blocked me when I asked for help. Just a smug pat on the back from the very people who watched me drown. I once told them, "Don't ever pretend you believed in me. You all left me for dead." I blocked her number again, this time permanently. A few days later, a voicemail came from an unknown number. The wedding invitation arrived in a white envelope with gold foil lettering and a wax seal. No return address, just my name and apartment number neatly spelled out. I later realized they must have used a different phone to bypass my block, as it was my father's voice. I brought the whole thing to my next therapy session and laid it on the table. My therapist studied it for a long time before asking one question. Inside was a formal invitation to my sister's wedding in 2 months at a vineyard outside the city. Black tie optional. A personal message or note, just a printed RSVP card and one line at the bottom. "What do they want from you now?" No answer. 3 days later, my mother messaged me. "It would mean a lot to your sister if you were there." I didn't reply, and my father called and I let it go to voicemail. It was the first time I'd heard his voice since the accident. Didn't ask how I was doing or mention my recovery. Instead, he told me I should be grateful they didn't coddle me when things got tough, saying, "Look where that led you. You bounced back. We were right not to interfere." I didn't delete the message, nor did I respond. A day later, my sister sent another text. "You're holding a grudge at the best period of my life." No mention of what happened. No mention of the hospital, the rental car, or the nights I went hungry. Just her personal celebration, her big day. I drafted a formal response, typed it, printed it, and signed it. "You lost the right to call me family when you left me alone in a hospital bed," I wrote and mailed it back. The next call was from my aunt. She claimed to be checking in, but quickly steered the conversation to the wedding. She said the family group chat was buzzing with people calling me selfish, bitter, and dramatic, claiming I was ruining what should have been a happy time. I asked her if she remembered what happened to me. She paused, then said, "Well, that was a while ago." Told her I wasn't interested in any more updates and hung up. 2 nights later, a cousin I hadn't spoken to since college messaged me privately. He said he'd seen everything in the group chat and couldn't believe how they were talking about me. I thanked him but didn't say anything more. I wasn't looking for defenders. I just wanted them out of my life. After that, my father left a long voicemail saying I was embarrassing myself. Claimed I was trying to make people feel sorry for me instead of taking responsibility for my actions. He said I needed to grow up and stop playing the victim. I blocked his number and my sister's number immediately after listening. No more texts, no more voicemails, no more reaching out. Whatever they had to say could stay in their private chat, far away from me. Added, the wedding happened without me. I only found out when a former coworker, distantly related to my sister's husband, mentioned it in passing. No one else contacted me, no one sent pictures, no one asked why I didn't show up, and they continued with the narrative they'd created, where I was the ungrateful one who cut them off for no reason. Honestly, I let them. For the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like peace. I still went to physical therapy every week, worked on a contract with a tech startup, saved money, and made consistent progress with my personal trainer. I discovered a small community of other freelancers in the city who met twice a month too. Discuss business and burnout. I got invited to a friend's housewarming. For the first time in 2 years, I made plans for a short vacation. Then one morning, standing in front of my apartment, mirror clean cut, standing tall without any support, I realized something profound had shifted, that I'd spent the entire previous year rebuilding. My family had a front row seat to my toughest moments and chose to walk away. But now, It was time to grow. I wasn't just going to recover, I was going to thrive, and they'd have no choice but to watch from the sidelines. On a Wednesday morning, an email landed in my inbox with the subject line, "Official Offer." It was from the startup where I'd been freelancing for the past 6 months. They wanted to hire me for a full-time remote position with full benefits, health and dental insurance, stock options, paid vacation, and a salary 3 times what I was making before the accident. I accepted within an hour. To celebrate the start of onboarding, I booked a solo trip to a national park 2 states away for the following week. I packed light, trail shoes, simple gear, nothing fancy. By dawn eyes, their music playing the whole time. No crutches or canes, just my own 2 legs on the winding trails. I hiked until sunset, slept under the stars in a rented cabin, and brewed my own coffee each morning while the air was still cold and quiet. It was my first vacation since before the crash, and it felt truly earned. When I returned, a friend from my freelancer group invited me to a small men's recovery group. Some members were former athletes healing from injuries. My phone stayed silent. My parents never contacted me after I declined the wedding. Others in the group were military veterans, while some, like me, were rebuilding after family breakdowns or life-altering events. We met twice a month at a community center, no lectures, no forced bonding, just raw honesty. I joined immediately. Sister never tried to reach out again. Group chat I'd heard about was probably still active, but no one contacted me about it. Their silence spoke louder than anything they could have said, and I let it be until a letter arrived at my apartment. I'd recently updated my address through official channels. I suspect someone got it indirectly, perhaps through an old billing record or a mutual contact. Inside was a formal notice stating that my parents were adjusting their estate plans. The message was clear. I was to be excluded from any inheritance. I had already hired a lawyer through my job's legal network when the first inheritance letter arrived. So, when this estate message came, I simply had them send back a formal statement on my behalf, requiring no further communication. It read, "I relinquish any and all claims to family assets, effective immediately. No fuss, no back and forth, just closure." Instead of dwelling on them, I used my new company's education assistance program to enroll in an online MBA. I balanced coursework with work and workouts in the evenings. The days were busy, but each one propelled me forward. A few months later, I started looking at real estate. I'd been saving consistently, maintaining a simple lifestyle, and had a down payment ready. My realtor showed me a quiet 1-bedroom cottage just outside the city, surrounded by trees, with a wraparound porch and enough yard to breathe. I made an offer the same day, and it was approved 2 days later. I signed the paperwork with only my name on the deed. On moving day, I stood in the living room with the windows open and the walls bare, knowing I'd crossed a line they'd never see again. A few months later, a cousin I hadn't spoken to since high school drove to my property and rang the gate intercom. He did a double take before recognizing me. We chatted for a few minutes before he asked if I wanted to grab lunch sometime. I agreed, not for nostalgia, but for closure. At lunch, he mentioned my father, saying he'd seen him at a local fundraiser. My father had been telling people I'd declined treatment and gone off the rails somewhere out west. I didn't react. I simply told him what really happened, how they all vanished when I needed them most, and how I built everything I had without a single dollar from them. He didn't argue, just nodded slowly and said, "Honestly, that sounds more like them." We paid our separate bills and made no plans to meet again. A few days later, I received a message from an unknown number. I listened to it once before blocking it. It was my father's voice. He didn't say his name, but there was no mistaking it. Just said, "I hope you enjoy your solitude. You chose it." I forwarded the number to my carrier and had it permanently screened. That line would never be open again. I deleted every backup of their contacts. No buried email threads, no preserved voicemails, no chance of re-entry. My phone belonged to the future, not the past. The last thing I did was write a letter to myself, not to send. It detailed everything from waking up alone in the hospital to the day the inheritance letter arrived, signed it, sealed it in an envelope, and put it in a fireproof lockbox under my bed. On the front, I labeled it, "The past stays here." I meant it. A call came from an unrecognized number, so I let it go to voicemail. The message was brief. A man introduced himself as my sister's fiancé. His voice was shaky, as if he didn't want to be making the call. My number was no longer available to anyone from that family, no matter how politely they asked or who sent them. He said my sister wanted to talk, hoped I'd listen, and asked me to call back. I deleted the message without a second listen. A week later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The envelope had no return address, just familiar handwriting. Inside were 4 pages of neatly folded, handwritten explanations from my sister. No apology, just pages of excuses. She claimed I was making things harder than they needed to be, choosing to carry hate. She wrote that despite our complicated family, we owed it to each other to reconnect before it was too late. I read every word once, then folded it back, up, and put it in a folder labeled for documentation only, just in case things escalated. What bothered me more than the letter was the fact that she even had my address. That evening, I called my old landlord, the one who owned the place above. The professor's garage? He sounded surprised to hear from me when I asked if he'd given out my new address. He hesitated, then admitted my mother had tricked him months ago by pretending to be from a hospital billing agency. I hadn't anticipated that angle, but I immediately updated all my forwarding settings after that call. The next day, I changed my phone number, not just for peace of mind, but to close every door they thought they still had a key to. I also had a home security system installed, complete with cameras, smart locks, motion sensors, and no loopholes or soft entry points. A few days later, the fiancé emailed again. He claimed he didn't know the full situation, but was caught in the middle and simply relaying her request. His tone was cautious and emotional, yet he still felt more like a messenger than someone genuinely invested. He told me my sister was pregnant, expecting their first child, and wanted to make things right before the baby arrived. He asked me to consider speaking with her just once, for the child's sake, but I didn't respond. A pregnancy doesn't undo abandonment, and a baby doesn't erase what they did when I needed them most. At my next therapy session, I mentioned the email. My therapist listened intently, then said something that resonated. It sounds like they want your forgiveness for their own comfort, not because they're truly sorry. Later that week, a box arrived at my front door with no return label. Inside was a baby onesie and a card that read, "Your nephew deserves to know his uncle." That was all. No names, no signatures, just that. I left the package sealed, walked straight to the outdoor trash can, and dumped it without a second thought. Then I sat at my desk and wrote a single statement in my journal. Children should be raised by people who understand love. And you made sure I never would. A few days passed. Then another message arrived, this time from my mother's second husband, whom I hadn't heard from in over a decade. I initially ignored it because I hadn't tightened my social media privacy settings, and he followed up with, "They're in pain, you know." I replied once, "Good." Then I blocked him too. I channeled that energy elsewhere. I joined a mentorship program run by a community nonprofit, where I meet with young men rebuilding their lives. Not long after, a coworker from my remote job invited me to a small industry dinner. I shared what I'd learned, not as a therapist, but as someone who'd walked through fire and found a way out. At the table, his father overheard my name and asked if I was related to someone from a nearby city. It turned out my father had been. Going to events, telling people I'd lost my way, and that he was grieving a son who cut off the family for no reason. I didn't react. I just finished my meal. Later that night, my coworker messaged me privately. He told me that after I left, he explained the true story to his father. The hospital, the silence, the betrayal, everything. His father didn't say much, but quietly admitted, "I've never been more embarrassed." A week later, I received another letter from my sister. This one was shorter, written in rushed handwriting. It ended with, "You won't even see the baby once. That's the path you've chosen." I shredded it and burned the remnants in my backyard fire pit. No photos, no ceremony, just ashes. Like everything they tried to salvage, they called it silence. But I called it protection. My promotion came during a normal Monday morning call. The department leader went over a few project metrics before dropping the news, effective immediately. I said thank you, accepted the offer, and scheduled my first team sync for later that week. Becoming head of design meant managing a small but growing team, attending strategic meetings, eventually stepping into a six-figure salary with stock options and a clear leadership track. With the pay raise, I finally had the means to invest in my house. I hired a local contractor for some of the bigger jobs, but I did most of the work myself. I gutted and rebuilt the kitchen over 6 weekends, tile by tile, cabinet by cabinet. Then I built a back deck from scratch, leveled it, stained it, sealed it, and paid for it in full. On my 33rd birthday, I grilled steak on the new deck. The sun had set, the string lights glowed, and music played softly from a speaker by the garden. There were no loans, no family handouts. My name was on every receipt and invoice. I poured a glass of good whiskey, opened a novel I'd been meaning to finish, and watched the stars appear one by one. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from an unfamiliar law office, informing me my father had suffered a stroke and was in critical condition. Wanted to be listed as an emergency contact or next of kin. I responded through my lawyer with a single-line statement. He lost that right the day he ignored my ICU stay. No contact, no role. A few days later, my sister sent me an email. She said it was serious, that he might not survive, and that I would regret not visiting. Her tone was careful, but it was clear she needed something. I didn't respond. I remembered lying in that hospital bed, ribs broken, legs split, lungs struggling to breathe, the nurse saying no one had called, and my mother's voice telling me not to guilt-trip people. During coffee, a college acquaintance casually mentioned, my sister was trying to raise funds for my father's medical costs. I didn't ask how he knew. I just nodded, paid for both our drinks, and left. My sister's next email arrived that same week. This time, she didn't try to be subtle. She knew I was doing well and asked if I could help just this one time. The next morning, I called my lawyer and had them draft a formal no-contact letter addressed to every member of my immediate family, my mother, father, and sister. The letter was short, simple, and legally binding. All future communication was to go through my counsel and only in cases of legal necessity. Any contact outside those terms would be considered harassment. While organizing old files, I found a framed photo in the back of a drawer. All of us standing together in a park years ago, a reunion I barely remembered. My father's hand was on my shoulder, my sister in the middle, my mother with her sunglasses pushed up on her head. I looked at the photo for 2 or 3 seconds before walking it to the trash bin and dropping it in without a blink. That night I added one more line to my journal before bed. You left me to die. Now you ask for help because you are dying. A few days later, I hosted a small gathering in my backyard with friends from work, my mentorship group, and the neighborhood. We grilled, shared stories, and joked about terrible dates and strange neighbors. No one asked about my family. They only knew who I was now. We drank to resilience as the music played into the night. A week later, I received a text from an old mutual friend with a brief message. My sister had given birth to a baby boy, and both mother and child were healthy. I stared at the screen for a moment before setting the phone down. A certified envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, signed by the delivery service. It contained official legal papers and an urgent request to designate me as my father's medical power of attorney. There was no anger, no sadness, no ageist. A quiet room, a full life, and the sound of wind rustling across the new deck outside. His condition had rapidly worsened. He was no longer capable of making medical decisions, so they needed someone to act on his behalf. I took the packet, shredded every page, and dropped the pieces into a trash bag. They wanted me to bear legal responsibility for a man who hadn't lifted a finger when I was clinging to life in an ICU bed. He hadn't called. He hadn't shown up. He hadn't even asked if I'd survived. A few days later, another letter arrived, this time hand-delivered by a courier. It was a neat envelope with cream-colored paper, and inside was a long handwritten note. from my sister. Pages of pleading urgency disguised as family duty. She said I was the only one who could help now, that Dad needed me, that it wasn't about the past, but about doing the right thing in the present. I read the entire thing carefully. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the voicemails. I left crying the nights I slept in a rental car, or the text from our father telling me to get it together. I contacted my lawyer and asked if there was any way I could be legally bound to this. He reviewed the documents, checked state guidelines, and confirmed that unless I signed something, I had no responsibility. I told him I'd never sign, and he said he'd draft a formal notice of refusal in case they tried to push again. That weekend, I received a message from someone I knew through my therapist's trauma group, a nurse at the hospital where my father was staying. She'd heard my name mentioned during a shift and quietly passed along some information without breaking any rules. My father was now incoherent and confused, asking for his son repeatedly, mumbling it in between moments of clarity. I didn't go. He had a choice back then, when my body was broken, when I was alone, when I couldn't even get a glass of water without help. He chose silence. Returned the favor by finishing my first MBA semester with straight A's and maintaining my strong work performance. Around the same time, I signed a deal with a boutique creative agency downtown to lead their design division while keeping my role at the tech company. 2 income streams, complete independence, no one to answer to, no one to save. A week later, a cousin I hadn't spoken to since high school drove up to my property and rang the gate intercom. He didn't say who he was, but I recognized his voice. I didn't say anything. Instead, I stood at my upstairs window and watched him walk back to his car. A few minutes later, the security camera captured the entire interaction. That same afternoon, I upgraded my security, installed perimeter motion lights, upgraded the cameras, and left specific instructions for neighbors to report any unwanted visitors. The hospital sent me a letter in a plain envelope with a white label informing me that my father had died. There were no funeral details or a final message from the family, just a single paragraph confirming the end of his life. No exceptions, no discussions. I folded the letter once and slid it into the fireproof lockbox with my legal papers. No grief, no anger, just the kind of finality that feels like a page closing. The next call was from the estate's executive, a formal notice that I'd been left out of everything. No inheritance, no mention, no provisions exactly as they had warned. I told the executive to relay one message back to whoever needed to hear it. Perfect. Tell them I wouldn't have taken a cent if they begged me to. A few days later, the last letter arrived from my sister. The envelope was thin, the handwriting sharp and messy. I didn't open it right away, but curiosity got the best of me. Inside was a single page. No more pretense, no more polite phrases, just venom. You'll die alone, bitter, forgotten. I didn't read the rest. I folded the paper slowly, walked it to the trash can beside the garage, and dropped it in. Lid shut. Done. That was the last I heard from any of them. And that's exactly how it will remain. A few months after my father's funeral, another courier arrived at my house, asking for my signature on a flat envelope in a padded folder. The sender was my sister. Inside was a smaller envelope with a note from your nephew for his future uncle, to be opened in 18 years. I hadn't agreed to anything, hadn't asked to be involved in that child's life, and didn't even know his name. I resealed the outer envelope and returned it to the courier the next morning, unopened. Inside there was a printed photo of a baby. In a blue blanket resting in a cot next to a second note from my sister, he deserves to know his family. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a university as part of a recovery and resilience lecture series. No apology, no accountability, just another angle. Another attempt to pull me back into their narrative, which I again rejected. There was no room for manipulation, no tolerance for rewritten history. I was too busy building my own. I flew in, gave a talk to a room of students and professionals, and afterward a line formed. People wanted to thank me, ask questions, and share parts of their own stories. I shook hands, signed programs, and walked out of that auditorium with my head held high. One of the organizers had read an article I'd contributed to and reached out. I used the momentum from that event to finish something I'd started years ago my first book. It was a self-published work about healing from betrayal, loss, and rebuilding without a safety net. I omitted names, places, and anything traceable. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about survival. I wrote it for those who had no one come for them and still made it. 2 months after the book's release, I received a handwritten letter from my former high school track coach. He said he'd stumbled upon the book by chance and recognized it was mine halfway through. "You outlived them," he wrote, "in every way that counts." That same month, I made my final mortgage payment. The house was entirely mine, paid for solely by my own efforts. No consigners, no family loans, no secret assistance, just a man with a broken spine. Some design skills, and a lot of determination. At one of the resilience workshops I was attending, I met someone intelligent, direct, and kind. We kept running into each other during classes and eventually started having lunch together. Conversations turned into long walks and eventually dinner. She carried her own scars, unique yet profound. She understood what it meant to rebuild alone. On our 5th date, I told her everything, no sugarcoating. She didn't flinch at the crash, the hospital, or the inheritance threats. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "That is not your humiliation. That is their failure." We continued seeing each other. I returned to the hospital, where I'd nearly died. I no longer regretted cutting my family out, but I did regret giving them so many chances in the first place. Every ignored voicemail, every unanswered message, every time I hoped they'd show up, and they didn't, I'd given them too much leeway. This time, as part of a donation drive for trauma patients, a nurse near the reception desk recognized me. Her eyes widened, then welled up. "You were the one we all thought wouldn't make it," she said. She led me down the hall and pointed out the room where I'd stayed, which had recently been painted. The bed was different, but I remembered the ceiling tiles. Before I left, I scribbled a note on a clean index card and gently taped it to the underside of the bed frame. Sometimes the ones you need the most walk away, and sometimes you're better off as a result. When I got home, I made one final decision. I contacted the local post office and requested that any future mail from my sister, her husband, or anyone with that last name be marked "Return to sender." I filed the forms, and from then on, their words would never land at my door again. That weekend, I grilled steak under the stars again, same setup as before. Deck lights on, speaker humming low, a glass of bourbon nearby, and the wind rustling. Leaves overhead. I stood there for a moment, the silence stretching out around me. I wasn't angry or bitter. I had built a life so full that there was no room for old ghosts. Mercy isn't always deserved. Sometimes denying it is how you show yourself you matter. My family turned their backs on me during the darkest moment of my life, but I rose anyway. When they returned, trying to rewrite the past and pull me back into their narrative, I closed the door, locked it, and walked away.